You will rarely see a movie where the status quo establishment hegemonic power is represented as the good guys. They are not the side we instinctively root for. We like underdogs. We like rebels, at least in the movies. Now, it is true enough that there are untold numbers of movies and TV shows about things like the military or police, procedurals kind of show, which can be fun, but those stories usually entail people who have some key disadvantages, like being behind enemy lines, or they're solving a mystery full of sudden plot twists and turns and red herrings, or they're chasing some unachievable MacGuffin or other. As someone who used to watch Chuck Norris movies when they actually came out in the theater, Chuck may well have kicked everyone's ass, and you knew he was going to, which was why they became kind of boring around the time I became more interested in girls than prepubescent power fantasies. But other than that one time where he got killed by Bruce Lee, who felt really bad about it, the odds were usually stacked against him. But he was Chuck Norris, and Chuck Norris always wins. Inarguably, the best part of the Star Wars franchise is the prequel series Andor, which is the prequel movie to Rogue One, which is the movie that came out before the first movies that came out, before the prequel movies to that one came out, and then anyway. At least, I'm not going to argue about it. I love Andor, and I think a lot of people do. But feel free to troll me in the comments below, as that does increase engagement, which the algorithm notices. While we're at it, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. Watch to the end of the video, even if you do so on mute. The odds are stacked against me in trying to launch a new channel into a very crowded field. In this case, I am the underdog. Please root for me. As much as I wish I could use clips from the movies, I always seem to get flagged for that, so for the moment, I'm not even going to try. But back to Andor, because it's awesome. We see a number of figures. And even though they are all morally compromised to some degree or other, we can't help but root for them. They're dashing and attractive and clever. In the Star Wars universe, the Empire and Palpatine are pretty objectively evil, so it's not a big deal if you kill a few million technicians and construction workers on the Death Star. In real life, of course, things aren't that simple, nor are the rebels always the good guys. The Southern Confederate rebels in the U.S. Civil War, which down south they do still call the War of Northern Aggression, were rebelling against the end of slavery. And the Islamists, who brought down the Twin Towers, which just saw its anniversary the other day at the time of this recording, want to establish a global caliphate and keep girls from getting education. So if a few people have to choose, well, a few thousand people have to choose between jumping to their deaths, like a guy I knew in high school, I actually saw a picture of it, burning to death or being crushed in the rubble, well, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, right? Violent rebellion is, of course, not the only kind, but it has a way of focusing our attention. What studies tend to show, though, is that the rank and file in any rebellion, i.e. the people who perpetrate the violence, are usually not that political at all, or at least hold the ideas of any rebellion pretty loosely. In many cases, the people who engage in political violence, and for that matter, violent political rhetoric, are not so much driven to these acts by their ideals. Often enough, they're simply violent people, and adopting ideals provides an excuse to express these impulses. That isn't always true. I am sure many of the soldiers fighting against the Russian invasion of Ukraine would much rather be reading poetry to beautiful women in fields of sunflowers, because who wouldn't? They didn't get a choice, or rather the choice they were given was that they can either submit to Putin's aggression or fight like hell. And so not only do we not have any right to judge them for what they do, we have a certain moral imperative to support them while they do it. What are rebels, though, and what is a rebellion? In psychology, you have to answer these pretty basic questions first before you can get to anything in particular. In my case, I'm going to use a $5 word to go with the suit, which, actually costs at least 5 times that. Today's word is valence, which means what is the power of something understood as the effect it is capable of having. So, psychologically speaking, we can define rebellion as a negatively valenced reaction to a perceived stimulus. For instance, not wanting to brush your teeth when you're a kid because you're neurodivergent and it feels weird, which you may have guessed is something I struggled with, or rather my parents did. Unfortunately for me and my teeth, Dr. Spock told parents in the 70s and 80s, never bribe your children. We don't emphasize that so much anymore, and to an extent never have. Really, untold numbers of children have been bribed into letting their parents yank a loose tooth with the promise that a stealthy fairy would leave a quarter under your pillow. At least that was the going rate. When I was a kid, I didn't get anything for this. Also, Spock, not the guy from Star Trek, okay? It's not a major point. Don't worry about it, but, shout out to Gen X. Anyway, there tend to be 2 different kinds of rebellion. One is psychologically motivated and the other is materially motivated. Power structures tend to take a very different approach depending on which kind they are facing. With a materially motivated rebellion, it's not all that uncommon to simply buy them off, give in to a few demands. Often just bribing the leadership is enough to calm things down. A psychologically motivated rebellion is tougher to fix, which is why the powers that be will handle them in the most draconian and terrifying way possible. Such efforts are rarely, if ever, successful, and usually just winnow groups down into a committed core who are now traumatized and therefore much more likely to commit a violent act. This can turn into a feedback loop which goes on for a very, very long time. I am looking at you, Israel, just in case you're worried about it. One of the reasons rebels fascinate us so much is because they are rather rare, and they're also usually unpopular, at least within their own cohort. In the famous Milgram Experiment, where people were asked to administer what they were told were very painful, even lethal electrical shocks to a learner in another room who was actually an actor, the vast majority of people continued to administer the shocks while the actor screamed and begged from the other room to make it stop. When debriefed afterwards on why they continued to administer the shock, they had a tendency to say that they either didn't have a choice or they had a loyalty bias to the experimenter who had paid them a little bit of money. That is a psychological idea we're going to have to explore in a future video. In some way, they justified their action. And when told about the people who refused to continue administering the shocks, they pretty invariably spoke negatively about them. Perhaps because of the implied judgment against their character and the other person's refusal to do this. Where it gets really interesting was that when a third group, who had not participated in the experiment at all, were asked about what they thought about the participants, they pretty invariably took the side of the rebels, imagining probably that they too would also have made the right choice, even though statistics say they almost certainly would not have. By the way, these results have been reproduced multiple times. One of the most common criticisms of rebels is that they aren't for anything, but rather only against some things. Rebel Without a Cause was a movie made in the 50s with James Dean, which was supposed to be about the shocking decay of America's youth. by modern standards, it was pretty tame. I mean, nobody's even, like, the worst drug anybody has is a cigarette. And back then it was cool. It was okay to be a teenager and smoke in the 50s. Totally fine. One of the problems with the movie's reception was that everybody pretty much took James Dean's side. In one scene, Jim, played by James, which actually gives you the feeling that they weren't really trying that hard back then or wanted to blur the lines between the character and the actor in the old studio system, finds his father, who normally wears a full suit, just puttering around the house. Please don't judge me. Is wearing this frilly floral apron over his suit. And James, Jim, he gets pretty upset, and he's wearing that red jacket with the t-shirt, one of the most iconic outfits in history. He gets all upset. He's like, "What are you wearing?" It's actually kind of a sweet moment that anchors the film, which is still worth a watch, at least as a museum piece. It also sums up how rebellion works. Rebel without a cause? Spoiler alert, rebels don't need one. Faced with stimulus, they react negatively, saying, "No, not that." Still, it tends to be one of the key aspects of rebellion that rebels get criticized. For those of you who remember Occupy Wall Street, they actually did have policy proposals, such as the Robin Hood tax on stock trades. They wanted to open their own banks, which is probably why they were systematically dismantled, and even the likes of Adam Curtis have been a little unfair to their memory. Meanwhile, billionaires increased their wealth 100x. To make this a little more pertinent to your modern lived experience, if you haven't noticed, we're living through a rebellious period in the U.S. and elsewhere. Figures like Stephen Miller, J.D. Vance, and Donald Trump, who absolutely deserves to be the third person on that list, are vowing to crush the organized left, which, as far as I can tell, doesn't particularly exist. We're some pretty disorganized people, as my one bookshelf demonstrates rather well. But boy, it is going to become organized if they actually use, or rather continue to use, the full force of a government towards a one-party authoritarian state. There is rebellion within MAGA itself. Some Trump voters are shocked, I tell you, that Trump decided to levy tons of tariffs on everything and everyone and deport just about everybody he can, even though that's exactly what he said he would do. Others feel like the government isn't being extreme enough, and people all over the political spectrum want the Epstein files released. As most of these things seem to be psychologically motivated rather than materially motivated, we can probably expect that the government's response will be just as draconian as they promise it will be. Thanks for watching. If you find psychological theory interesting, be sure to check out my other videos. Like and subscribe, leave a comment, or better yet, leave a question I can try and answer for you. And I will see you again soon.